Willow has to still deal with school and life issues, while at the same time training under Giles in secret. At least for now. Let's begin Chapter 2 of the further adventures of the Sunnydale Ranger. Sunnydale High School, 0930 hours. A week had passed since the incident with Igon and Giles. For the most part, things had returned to normal. Well, as normal as things could be in a city sitting on top of a hellmouth. It was finally career week, the one event Willow had been looking forward to. She eagerly pulled both Buffy and Xander over to one of the tables to collect their questionnaires and number 2 pencils. They sat together at one of the tables to complete the test that was supposed to predict their future career prospects. "What are you hoping for, Buff?" Willow asked excitedly, glancing at her best friend before starting to read her own questionnaire. A moment later, she eagerly began shading answers on the Scantron sheet. "You're too happy, Will," Xander muttered. Willow looked up and grinned at him before turning back to her questionnaire. Buffy had just opened hers, quickly scanned the questions and grimaced. She looked up at Willow and asked, "Do you like shrubs?" "Do you like shrubs?" Willow repeated, confused. "Do I?" Buffy asked thoughtfully, raising an eyebrow. Both girls were thankfully saved from further confusion when Xander spoke up. "Don't look at me," he said while flipping through his own questionnaire. He looked up at them and shrugged. "So, am I a people person? Or do I prefer my own company? What if I'm a people person who keeps his own company by default?" "Take none of the above, Xand," Buffy said, focusing again on her own form. "There is no none of the above," Xander replied, leaning forward and whispering conspiratorially. "And do you know why?" "I'm afraid you're going to tell us," Willow teased. Xander narrowed his eyes at her, then leaned back and rested his hands behind his head. "Because it would introduce more variables into their little number-crunching little world." He nodded solemnly. "And yes, I said little twice to emphasize how little their world is." "So, littleness?" Willow asked, arcing an eyebrow. She turned to Buffy, who met her gaze. The two girls sighed. "I already know what I'll be doing," Buffy huffed, glaring at the questionnaire. "Can anyone here say fast food?" "Buffy?" Willow looked over at her friend in concern and placed a hand gently over hers. "Sorry, Buff," Xander winced. "You're looking at a high-risk, sub-minimum wage future." "Xander!" Willow frowned and shot him a disapproving glare. "He's right, Will," Buffy said, marking another answer before looking up at the redhead. She tapped her temple with her finger and said, "It's right there, sealed in fate. I'm the, you know." She then whispered, "Slayer." "Oh, pooh," Willow muttered, leaning back in her chair. She smirked at Buffy. "Will," Buffy said, narrowing her eyes, "are you checking me out?" "Ooh," Xander cooed excitedly, leaning forward. Willow and Buffy turned to him with confused expressions. "I mean, you know, Willow and Buffy." He began gesturing, his fingers on one hand tapping against the other. "And Willow and Buffy." Should I shut up now?" "Yes," Willow and Buffy said in unison. They looked at each other again before Willow changed the subject. "Check out the law enforcement section," she said to Buffy. "Think about it. You're the Slayer. You'll be the first to know if there's a demon attack or vampire sighting. Even on a normal day, you'd be chasing suspects until they give up. You've got the stamina and stuff to do all that running." She grinned. "You've seen those shows. They run a lot." "Yeah," Buffy replied, shaking her head. She looked at the questionnaire again. "Still don't see myself as a police person." "How about me?" Xander asked, just before Cordelia's voice rang out from behind them. Willow looked over her shoulder and saw Cordelia glancing down at the clipboard. She was about to wave when she caught herself. She was the middle of her core friend group. She couldn't be too friendly with Cordelia in front of the others. They might think something had changed. Willow had already thanked Cordelia privately for helping them during the Halloween fiasco. But Cordelia had insisted that Willow never bring it up again. That day had been the weirdest of her life, she said. Since then, things had returned to business as usual between Cordelia and the Scoobies, although now and then Willow would play harmless tricks on her using telekinesis. Once the group finished the questionnaires, they headed to their respective classes. After school, Willow spent 2 hours training with Giles outside his apartment. "So," she said, ducking and rolling to one side before leaping over sweeping staff aimed at her feet. "Did you talk to Miss Calendar?" Buffy, Willow, and Xander had all noticed the change between Giles and Jenny Calendar. Their interactions had cooled considerably after the Igon incident. The group had been meaning to ask Giles about it, but every time her name came up, he shut down. "No," he replied, stepping back to avoid Willow's swing before countering with a stronger blow. Willow was barely able to block it with her staff. She then remembered one of Niko's techniques and began reinforcing her physical defense with telekinesis. The training intensified. After several minutes of back and forth strikes, Giles finally shattered Willow's staff with a heavy swing. She threw the broken pieces aside, crossed her arms, and focused. A small glowing barrier shimmered into existence in front of her, just in time to block the next impact. Giles blinked in surprise, but didn't stop. He aimed lower, but Willow jumped over his attack. She sprinted forward, blocking another strike with her barrier, and then another. Finally, she reached him, grabbed his arm, spun him around, and kicked him below the shoulder. Still holding his arm, she pressed a pressure point with her other hand, causing Giles to drop his staff. Then, with a quick maneuver, she tripped him to the ground. "Gotcha," Willow panted, smiling down at him. "Are you certain?" Giles asked. He swept her legs out from under her. Willow yelped as she hit the ground. A few seconds later, both of them were back on their feet, facing off again. Willow smiled slyly and gave Giles a mental push with her telekinesis, just enough to distract him. She then lunged with a sidekick, but missed as he sidestepped and knocked her back with a kick to the back of her knee. She landed on one knee, hopped back up, and returned to her stance. "Confidence is good, Willow," Giles said as he punched. Willow blocked it with telekinesis and retaliated, striking his shoulder. "But," he added, reaching behind him and pulling out 2 small daggers, "you shouldn't get overconfident." Willow's eyes widened as Giles prepared to throw the knives. She rolled aside as he hurled them, and in mid-roll, she reached out with her mind and caught both blades in midair. "Keep them in the air," Giles instructed, rushing into his apartment. "Giles?" Willow called, still maintaining her focus as the 2 knives hovered in front of her. He returned with a canvas bag, set it on the ground, and began pulling out weapons. One by one, he hurled them toward her. Another knife, a hand axe, a crossbow, and even a short sword. "Giles, not fair," Willow panted, eyes wide as she caught each weapon telekinetically. All the weapons now floated mid-air, their sharp edges aimed directly at her. "Good girl," Giles said, standing at ease, also panting. "Now, release." Willow let out a long breath and dropped her arms. All the weapons clattered to the ground at once. She collapsed onto the floor herself, lying flat on her back, completely spent. Her gray shirt clung to her chest, soaked in sweat as she stared up at the sky and silently wondered what might have happened if she had failed to catch even one of those weapons. Giles walked over to the redhead and looked down at her, extending his hand to help her up. "Quite sorry about that, Willow," said Giles, pulling her to her feet. "As you know, enemies will use whatever advantage they have to get to you, or to Buffy or Xander. They won't play fair, as you put it. I believe that should be part of Niko's training as well." "Yeah," said Willow, bending over and grabbing her knees as she panted, imagining sharp weapons being thrown and shot at her. She shook her head, then stood up and looked at the Watcher. But I guess I never thought you would be the one doing it, you know? You've been training much harder than even Buffy, said Giles as Willow glanced around before helping him collect the weapons scattered on the ground. And your skills have grown at an exceptional pace. It helps that I've got Niko's stuff in my head, said Willow as Giles nodded while they picked up the weapons. And Buffy's a slayer. I mean, she's stronger than me, she heals faster, so she doesn't really need as much training, right? Everyone needs training, Willow, said Giles as he carried some of the weapons into his apartment, with Willow following close behind. Think about it. Without that training, would you have been able to stop those weapons in midair? All of them? Probably not, replied Willow. Exactly, said Giles, handing her a cold drink, which she gulped down. Niko was already trained for that, so it's easy for her, but you weren't, so you had to learn. That's why I asked you to focus on what she did for her mental discipline, and it looks like you've done excellently. Thanks, said Willow with a grin. Now come on, said the Watcher as Willow picked up her bag. I'll drive you home. Willow walked out of the apartment with Giles following. He closed the door behind him before walking alongside her toward the stairs that led to the curb where his car was parked. So, Willow said with a grin, glancing at Giles, you never said anything about Miss Calendar? No, I did not, replied Giles. Come on, Giles, said Willow, a playful pout on her face. Throw me a bone here. Buffy, Xander, and I are worried about you. I mean, there's this clicking sound you make when you're stressed, and... Clicking sound? Asked Giles, looking first ahead, then at Willow. Yeah, she replied, a clicky sound. And over the past week, we've been getting a lot of the clicky sound. In your office, during research, even now when you're making it, and Willow, said Giles, cutting off her rambling with a sigh. I'm not making any clicky sounds. And besides, this is going to take time. What happened to Jenny was a horrible thing. If she needs time to get her mind in order, then I'll give it to her. All we're saying is, talk to her, said Willow as she looked at him, for all our sakes. That clicky noise is going to drive us batty. And in Sunnydale, batty isn't exactly a word you want to throw around. It makes me think about vampires. Willow, said Giles, shaking his head as they reached his car, a silent plea not to push the conversation any further. Fine, sighed Willow as she got into the vehicle. I tried. Tomorrow it's Buffy coming after you. The day after that, Xander. And you know what he's going to do. My days are doomed, aren't they? Said Giles as he got into the driver's seat and turned the engine, while Willow closed the passenger side door. Oh, you know they are, she replied with a chuckle as Giles drove her home. To be continued.